Exactly. News and views with me, Julie Ali, right here on Salam Media. Now, our next guest is a political economist, a political ecologist, and scholar of social mobilization. His name is Patrick Bond, and he lectures at UJ. We're going to be looking at the issue around Oxfam's latest report. They are saying that the 10 richest men in the world doubled their wealth amid the COVID pandemic. That kind of sounds almost obscene, does it not? Because it's telling us that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. What does that mean for the global population and the global economy? You can't have such a great divide, can you? Is that the reason why we are having the type of political uprisings that we see all around the world, very especially in African states and in the Middle East? I don't know. It's quite possible that is the reason. Let's hear from Patrick Bond. A very good morning to you. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, Salam, it's great to be with you and the listeners.
Always a pleasure talking with you, Patrick. And it's really sick. It's shocking to hear that while the rest of the world was in shutdown, literally in shutdown, over the past almost 2 years, people losing jobs, livelihoods, people losing their lives, and the rich were just getting richer and still are on that trajectory. What's wrong with
Right.
our world?
Well, there's plenty of it, and it's very good that we can look at some statistics from Oxfam to look at the symptoms, but maybe we can get to the causes, which I think are in an unequal economy, one that creates more and more environmental and public health externalities. That is, if you're a capitalist and you're engaged in the market transaction, you can make more profit if you pollute, but you don't internalize those costs. You just dump them on people, or if you move your economy deeper and deeper into terrains like Central Africa or parts of the Asian jungles, you're going to come across new diseases, whether they're coming out of bats or monkeys, whether it's Ebola in Central Africa or apparently, it's not 100% sure, but apparently we got COVID from bats that went through either a market or some laboratory in Wuhan, China. And as the economy pushes and pushes into these new areas, that's another externality. So as political economists, we're very worried that the capitalist system basically doesn't have a system of internalizing and correcting, self-correcting for those. Wherever possible, they simply take profits but dump the costs. That's, to me, is the underlying cause.
Is there a way of correcting that imbalance?
Yes, absolutely. For example, we've had probably the most inspiring single self-correction of, let's say, the profiteering of monopoly capitalism in the form of pharmaceutical companies that kept a monopoly. It's basically a property right guaranteed by the World Trade Organization, intellectual property right, over AIDS medicine. So you remember, if we were talking 20 years ago, that would be the main thing that we would look at as unjust, that a few big pharmaceutical companies were cleaning up. But exactly 20 years ago, that was changed by virtue of activists, the Treatment Action Campaign in South Africa, led by Zaki Ahmed, Louis Sekadula, and they put pressure on the elites here in South Africa. They called President Mbeki a genocidaire, and they put pressure on internationally. But they also teamed up with Doctors Without Borders and Oxfam and ACTA and many other groups to put pressure on the international legal system called Trade-Related Intellectual Property System. And therefore, we now have generic medicines. It used to cost $120,000 a year to get these medicines. Now it's free in the public sector. So this is one of the great examples. And it's very ironic that President Ramaphosa, Indian leader Narendra Modi, the Kenyan leader Jomo Kenyatta, and even King Swati from Eswatini have put a very similar proposal to the same World Trade Organization. And they've basically run up against very greedy Europeans. First, Angela Merkel. We're hoping that her replacement, Olaf Scholz, will change policy on that, and then also Boris Johnson, who, as we know, is kind of has a racist tendency when it comes to Africa. He's demonstrated that. But when 20 years ago, our activists fought against these kind of global economic injustices, and they won. We then raised the life expectancy. It went down to as low as 52 years. The average South African dying at age 52, and now, just before COVID hit, it's 65. And with COVID hitting this country so hard, and with COVID basically being an opportunity for intellectual property rights, so big pharma corps, but also, as you said, these top 10 billionaires just got so much richer. They today own more than the bottom 3.1 billion people, right? So they had their wealth doubling. And the number one beneficiary is the South African, Elon Musk. So it's really interesting to ask, well, what could be done? Could we put a major tax, a windfall tax, which is what Oxfam recommends, which I think is perfectly reasonable. But there's so many tax dodges. Even Elon Musk moved last year from California to Texas, so we'd have a zero state income income tax rate. And it's that kind of illicit financial flows and tax dodging that our government leaders let these guys get away with. And I think South Africa is one of the worst, as was demonstrated in the Financial Action Task Force, which is an international body, and they condemned South Africa for a treasury and a reserve bank that's pretty much slackers when it comes to these illicit financial flows. Even President Ramaphosa, before he became president, when he was head of MTN, he was head of Shanduka, he was the main internal investor in Lonmin. He used these same illicit financial flows, setting up, for example, all kinds of tax-free dodges in Mauritius. He was implicated in the Bermuda marketing wing of Lonmin. That was about 1.4 billion rand went there. So even our top leader in this country is someone who's basically gotten rich through these kinds of illicit means. And we could, if we had political will, say, tighten the exchange controls, put on windfall taxes. Instead of cutting corporate taxes, last year, then Finance Minister Mboweni cut them from 28 to 27. Well, let's put them up to what they were, say, in 1992. They were 52% for corporates, and they've been so profitable in South Africa. The corporates have had the basically fourth highest profit rates in the world, according to the IMF, but their reinvestment is negligible. They don't even cover wear and tear on their machines these days with their what they call gross fixed capital investment. So these are some of the ways, I think, both from below with activists, and if we had a stronger government that was more redistributive, instead of simply throwing out small, inadequate social grants, hopefully that might change in next month's budget, but I suspect we'll still see, kind of 350 rand a month, when actually you really need about 1,500 rand a month to be at the poverty line even. So those are the sorts of debates that we're seeing, the basic income grant, but I think a tougher approach would be to call for major taxes on the rich and on corporates, which is what Oxfam promotes, but also tighter exchange controls so they don't run away with all their money.
All right. So Oxfam's paper stated that increasing economic, gender and racial inequalities, as well as the disparity that exists between countries, are tearing our world apart. They go on to say that over 160 million people are projected to have been pushed into poverty. And they also say inequality kills, and we know that. This has obviously been published ahead of the World Economic Forum's Davos meeting, which is happening as we speak. Do you think that they're going to tackle this issue? Do you think anything can come out of it, or is it just the rich countries getting together, putting their heads together and, doing all sorts of deals and, in a small way or on the sidelines decide on environmental issues and what they're going to do for the poor? And as you say, taxes for the rich needs to go way, way up, and kind of give more weight to these type of issues. Can we hope for that at least?
Well, let's hope so. But, usually the World Economic Forum is in a ski resort called Davos, yes, Switzerland. Beautiful facilities, warm lodges with lots of drinking and celebrating the richest people in the world and the government that they basically have in their pockets. South Africans have gone there. Even Nelson Mandela, he went there in 1992, and it was, as he put it, the moment where he was told he shouldn't follow the Freedom Charter. He should drop this idea of nationalizing and socializing the wealth. So yes, you're generally right. However, this year, as well as last year, because of the Omicron variant, which is so contagious, they've decided to do it online. So it's not the same sort of milieu. But I think what you're saying is you get rhetoric from the World Economic Forum. The current rhetoric is around what they call the Great Reset, because they kind of acknowledge extreme inequality. They've had Oxfam there. They've had critics who are polite and gentle. They wear suits and ties. They've had this kind of message that they're very worried about the climate crisis. They're worried, as you say at the outset, that the extreme conditions, COVID, climate crisis, over $120 billion worth of insured damage and hundreds of billions of dollars worth of uninsured costs that are associated with the climate crisis that occurring annually. And they're also concerned about inequality. So yes, whether we need to have outside pressure like social movements rising up, and all over Africa, since about December 2010, when in Tunisia, Mohamed Bouzizi, who is sorry, not Bouzizi. Yes, it was Mohamed Bouzizi. He was no, sorry, that's another another figure. But anyway, the Tunisian youth who killed himself sparked a riot and upsurge of democratic and economic justice protests across North Africa, and then that came down through the continent and overthrew quite a few elites. Right now, today in Sudan, it's happening again because the army had taken over after the al-Bashir regime had been thrown out about a year and a half ago, two years ago. And that's the kind of spirit, I think, that gives me the hope of Africans uprising, sort of against the rhetoric of Africa Rising. Africa Rising was sort of Davos, World Bank, Economist magazine, huckster version of what the continent could be about 10 years ago when there was a very strong commodity boom and the elites were really getting rich. And they said, oh, Africa is rising. But then came the end of the commodity super cycle in 2015, and we saw more and more protests, exactly as you say. People are fed up. And sometimes there's strong democratic protests. But as we saw in July last year, not always. We saw in Durban, in Pietermaritzburg, in parts of Joburg and even Pretoria. We saw in the townships, some of the inner city areas, the powder keg of South Africa blowing up and massive violence, a sort of, upsurge of anger and looting and arson, 350 deaths, approximately 50 billion rand worth of damage. Now, for President Ramaphosa, this was just a small, well-orchestrated economic sabotage by a group that had manipulated the masses. If you talk to Mswaneli Manyi or Carl Niehaus, it was a love of Jacob Zuma who had just been put in jail. If you talk to a few others, for example, Kanye College, they say, well, it's the food riot. But I think the powder keg is what we're agreeing on, that when you build up such pressure on people, their patience blows, right? And they basically blow up.
Okay, seeing that you've touched on the uprisings or the riots here in South Africa, those issues haven't been addressed. We still have high unemployment. I mean, we've just got approximately 1 million young people coming through matric. What's going to happen to them in job opportunities? I've just been told by my producer to wrap up because we've got our next guest on standby. Let's leave that. If you can give me a quick answer, can I take that?
Yes, well, mass unemployment, the rate went up to 47%. The government still isn't doing anything about creating jobs, even though we have such huge social needs. So that's a tragedy, and we'll see more protests and riots and anger from the society since they're just tokenistic responses so far. It's going to be a tough 2022.
Professor Patrick Bond, it really was a pleasure talking with you this morning. Undoubtedly, we will pick up and talk some more on these issues at a later date. Thank you for your time. Have yourself a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.
Professor Patrick Bond is a political economist, political ecologist, and scholar of social mobilization. He lectures at UJ, and that's brought us up to 8:32 a.m. News and views on Salam Media.
Alhamdulillah, we are finally free of riba. Barkat, love.
Ja, moet jy na Mauritius stop